If this brings you peace, consider subscribing. It helps me keep making these stories for you. Before we begin, dim the lights if you can, settle into a comfortable position. Maybe pull a blanket close, and let's take 3 slow breaths together. In through the nose, hold gently, and release. Again, in, hold, and let go. One more time, a soft, steady breath, in and out. Tonight, we're going back thousands of years to a world where the Nile carried life like a silver ribbon through the desert, and where pyramids were not ruins, but living monuments. But rather than focusing on the pharaohs themselves, glittering and distant, we'll slip into the sandals of someone less celebrated, but perhaps more relatable. A servant in the household of a pharaoh. Their life was not one of gold and power, but of routine, ritual, and quiet endurance. And maybe, by imagining their day, we'll find a little calm rhythm for ourselves, not imagine waking before the sun, in the kind of darkness that feels thick, broken only by the quiet shuffle of others rising around you. The air is cool, even chilly, because the desert night holds cold like a secret. You stretch on a simple reed mat, joints stiff, and the faint smell of smoke from last night's fire lingers. There is no alarm clock, of course, just the duty of knowing when it is time, and the call of temple bells or the soft commands of overseers. You are one of many servants, assigned to the palace, and today, like every day, your work begins before the pharaoh himself stirs. The palace is not silent. Even now, in the darkness, there are footsteps, whispers, and the occasional clatter of a clay jar against stone. Servants like you are the unseen gears of this great machine called Egypt. Without you, nothing runs, but with you, everything appears effortless. There is a calmness in routine, though, and perhaps even pride, after all. Serving the living God of Egypt is no small honor, even if it means sore hands and weary bones. You gather your simple linen kilt, still faintly smelling of river water where it was washed, and tie it snugly at the waist. Your hair is cropped short for cleanliness, or perhaps shaved altogether, so the cool air brushes against your scalp. There are no mirrors to consult, just the feel of fabric and the tug of knots. You splash your face with water from a clay pot, the liquid shockingly cold, enough to make you fully awake. Imagine that first shock like dipping into a swimming pool too early in the morning. Bracing, unpleasant, but necessary. Outside, the horizon is barely glowing. A soft purple line where the desert meets the sky. Birds begin to stir in the reeds along irrigation canals, and a donkey brays somewhere in the distance, annoyed at being woken early. The palace itself is already coming alive. Guards in crisp kilts stand at their posts, holding spears that glint faintly even in dawn's half-light. High walls block out much of the world beyond. But you can sense the hum of a city outside, craftsmen preparing tools, bakers lighting ovens. Children stirring beside tired mothers dot your task today, like most days, is simple yet endless. You will fetch water, grind grain, help prepare food, clean chambers, and stand ready should your presence be needed. There is a rhythm to this, the scrape of stone against grain, the hollow thump of jars set down in a row, the sweeping of rush brooms across floors. In our modern world, we complain about long work shifts, but for you, this is life itself. Work is not something separate from existence. It is the existence, and perhaps that makes it easier in some strange way. You are not waiting for the weekend. There is no weekend. Only the slow cycle of dawn, noon, dusk, and night, over and over again. One of your first duties is to help bring water. Imagine carrying a clay jar nearly as tall as your thigh, heavy even when empty. You walk with others toward the palace cistern, where water brought from the Nile is stored. It smells faintly earthy, with that metallic tang water often carries. Together, you fill jars, the splashing echoing in the cool stone chamber. You balance the jar on your shoulder, feeling its weight press down. You steady it with one hand and carefully walk back, sand crunching softly beneath bare feet. This is repeated many times a day. Your muscles are used to it. Still, by night, your shoulders ache as though pressed by unseen hands. Food must also be prepared. Grains are ground with a handstone, back and forth, until flour forms a soft, pale pile. It's tedious work. You might think of it as the ancient equivalent of scrolling endlessly through your phone feed, repetitive, numbing, but strangely comforting because of its rhythm. The bread that results will be dark, coarse, filled with grit from the stone, not the soft bakery bread of our imagination. In fact, some skeletons found from this period show teeth worn down to the root from years of chewing sandy bread. Imagine biting into toast sprinkled not with sugar, but sand. That was daily reality. Later in the morning, you help in the kitchens. Fires are stoked, smoke curling up toward stone vents. The smell of roasting goose and simmering lentils fills the air, mingling with the sweetness of dates stored in woven baskets. Your role may be small, chopping, stirring, fetching ingredients, but each task is part of a larger dance. You are aware that a mistake in the kitchen, a dish burned or under-seasoned, could ripple upward. The overseers are harsh, and punishment can be swift. Better to keep your head down and hands steady. The Pharaoh himself is distant to you, more God than man. You may glimpse him in passing, carried in a chair, or hear his voice echo from a hall. Servants do not look directly unless commanded. Still, you sense his presence everywhere, in the hush that falls when he passes, in the carefulness of the officials, in the way even silence feels more important in his palace. Serving him is not like serving a master. It is like tending to a flame that cannot be allowed to flicker. As the sun climbs higher, heat begins to creep into the palace. Stone walls warm under the desert sun, and the air grows heavy. Sweat runs down your back, linen sticking to skin. Still, the work does not stop. You find small moments of relief, the cool shadow of a colonnade, a gulp of water, a shared smile with another servant. Small human comforts threaded through the grand machinery of empire. And yet, as monotonous as it sounds, there is also fascination. The palace is a place of stories. You overhear priests chanting as they prepare offerings, speaking words so ancient and rehearsed that they feel like part of the air itself. You catch glimpses of scribes bent over scrolls, their reed pens scratching symbols that look like tiny pictures. Sometimes you carry laundry past a chamber where dancers practice for festivals, bodies moving like reeds swaying in the river breeze. These flashes remind you that life here is not only labor, but also art, ritual, and spectacle. Tonight we have only begun, dipping a toe into the pool of a servant's world. But what about the rituals that shaped their mornings, and the unseen tasks that connected them, not just to the pharaoh, but to the gods themselves? That's what we'll explore in the next part. The sun is now fully awake, painting the sky with gold that bleeds down into the courtyards of the palace. The chill of dawn is gone, replaced by the warmth of a day that promises heat, dust, and the endless hum of life in the service of a king. But before the tasks of the day can properly unfold, there are rituals, because in Egypt, even the simplest acts are bound tightly with the sacred. To serve the pharaoh is to serve the gods, and so the lines between religion and daily duty are almost invisible. Imagine stepping quietly into the temple precinct of the palace, the air heavy with the smell of burning incense. It's not a sweet perfume like modern candles, but something sharper, resinous, smoky, with undertones of frankincense and myrrh. The smoke rises in thin gray threads, curling into the high ceilings and making the morning light filter through like mist on a river. Priests move slowly, their shaved heads gleaming. their linen robes spotless. Every movement is deliberate. They wash their hands again and again in stone basins, reminding you that purity is the gateway to power in this world. You are not a priest, but as a servant. You sometimes help prepare these spaces, laying out offerings, arranging loaves of bread and jars of beer, setting fruits and flowers in precise rows. You might smile quietly to yourself, thinking how odd it is that the gods require food and drink every single day, just as people do. The loaves are fresh, the beer is foamy and warm, the fruits glisten. Of course, everyone knows the gods do not actually eat these offerings. After the rituals, the food is removed, divided among priests, or perhaps even handed down further. It's a celestial meal plan with very earthly beneficiaries. Some say this is the oldest catering service in history. As the priests chant, their words wash over you. You do not understand every phrase, but the cadence is calming, like waves lapping against stone. Imagine listening not for meaning, but for rhythm. In a sense, it is like listening to a podcast in a foreign language, soothing not because you grasp the words, but because they weave a gentle, predictable soundscape. The Egyptians believed the right words, spoken the right way, held actual power, keeping chaos, the great serpent Apophis, at bay for another day. Your tasks are smaller, but no less necessary. You sweep sand from the temple floor. You refill oil lamps so their flames never go out. You bring baskets of clean linens. Each act is simple, but together they form a foundation. If you falter, the great chain of ritual weakens. If you do well, the order of the world is reaffirmed, and Egypt continues to stand tall between the desert and the river. It is humbling, but also quietly empowering. You are a thread in the vast tapestry, invisible on your own, but essential to the pattern. By mid-morning, the palace itself stirs more fully. The halls echo with footsteps. Officials in crisp kilts stride briskly. Guards shift spears from hand to hand, and scribes tuck scrolls under their arms, as if they are carrying the very weight of wisdom. You, like other servants, move quietly, always stepping aside for higher ranks, always lowering your gaze. But your eyes still catch glimpses of things most people in the city beyond will never see. Marble columns painted with bright colors, not the faded remains we know today. Gold leaf glittering in sunbeams. Floors polished so smooth you almost see your reflection. It is a house not just of stone, but of spectacle, designed to remind every visitor that the pharaoh is closer to a god than to a man. Food preparation continues through the day. Imagine the great kitchen as a buzzing hive. Fires roar in open hearths. Spits turn slowly with joints of meat. Clay pots bubble with stews. Servants rush in and out carrying trays, their arms reddened from heat. You're chopping herbs, pounding garlic with a stone pestle, your hands sticky with juices. Somewhere behind you, another servant drops a jar, and it shatters with a crash. The sound hangs in the air like a held breath. Everyone freezes for a heartbeat, and work resumes, but you know that servant may not eat tonight. Still, the food that emerges is astounding. Bread, beer, lentils, onions, cucumbers, figs, honey cakes, roasted ducks, even Nile fish seasoned with coriander. It is a feast fit not only for a god king, but also for the officials and courtiers who orbit him, like planets around the sun. And yet you, a servant, may eat only scraps. A piece of bread here, a few lentils there. Hunger is not unknown to you, though you work among plenty. That contrast is part of life. At the heart of all this, of course, is the pharaoh himself. You may not see him closely today, but you feel his presence in everything. His chambers are cleaned with special care, his clothes laid out with precision, his sandals polished. Even his wigs, yes, wigs, thick black curls crafted from human hair, are combed and perfumed. Servants like you handle them gently, as though touching something sacred. And in a sense, you are. To serve the pharaoh is to brush against divinity. Even if only through linen and leather dot around noon, the sun becomes merciless. The palace grows hot, and the air is thick with buzzing flies. Servants fan the pharaoh with ostrich feather fans, a slow and endless rhythm. You may be asked to help carry large jars of cool water from shaded storage, or to sprinkle the floors lightly so the evaporation cools the stone. Imagine the relief of dampness underfoot, a primitive air conditioning system. There is a sense of timelessness in these tasks, as though they have been done for centuries and will continue for centuries more. And through it all, whispers move like wind. Servants trade quiet gossip. Which official angered the pharaoh yesterday? Which scribe fainted from heat? Which dancer was seen slipping out of someone else's chamber? Gossip is the servant's entertainment, the ancient equivalent of scrolling through social media stories, catching up on who's trending and who's been canceled. Except here, canceled may mean exile, or worse, as the heat drags on. You find moments to rest your aching legs. Perhaps you lean against a pillar, watching dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight. For just a breath, the world feels still. You think of your family, maybe living in a modest home near the city edge, their lives simpler but freer. You wonder what the Nile looks like at this hour, whether fishermen are pulling in their nets, whether children are splashing in the shallows. Then someone calls your name, and you're back to the tasks at hand. Serving in the palace is not glamorous, but it is never dull. The constant swirl of ritual, food, gossip, and spectacle keeps you on edge, always attentive, always aware of the weight of your role. Yet even as sweat stings your eyes and muscles burn, there's a strange comfort in knowing the rhythm will continue tomorrow. The same tasks, the same rituals, the same cycle of dawn to dusk. Predictable, steady, almost meditative. But what about when the day begins to tilt toward afternoon, when the heat gives way to shadows and the palace changes its rhythm once again? That's what we'll explore in the next part. By the time the sun begins its slow drift westward, the palace shifts. Morning is about order, ritual, and the precise rhythm of serving the divine household. But afternoon brings something different, a hum of activity that feels looser, almost restless, as though the entire palace breathes a little deeper once the rituals are complete and the worst of the heat begins to fade. Imagine stepping into a shaded courtyard lined with tall columns. The stone under your feet is still warm, radiating the heat it has stored all morning, but the shade offers relief. Birds flit between palm fronds, and a fountain splashes softly in the center, its water cool and clear. The sound of trickling water is a blessing in the desert, and you pause for just a moment, savoring the way it echoes in the stone space. For servants, these small moments of calm are like hidden treasures, tucked away in long days of labor, in the afternoons. Your duties may take you to the outer halls, where visiting officials arrive. You carry trays of beer, cooled slightly by being stored in clay jars buried in damp sand. The taste is sour, thick, almost gritty, not like the beer you might imagine today, but refreshing in its own earthy way. Guests drink deeply, wiping foam from their beards, and you slip away unnoticed, your feet soundless on the smooth floors. The goal is always to be invisible, to do your work so seamlessly that no one even remembers you were there, yet you notice everything. The way a foreign envoy eyes the gold inlay on a chair, the way a noblewoman adjusts her wig to hide a thinning patch of hair, the way an official coughs too much, perhaps a sign of illness. You are the quiet eyes and ears of the palace, though no one asks your opinion. In your head, you might even weave stories, turning these glimpses into little tales to share later with fellow servants. After all, gossip is the servant's currency, and you gather it like coins sometimes. In the afternoons, there are rehearsals or entertainments. Musicians gather in shaded halls, plucking harps and strumming lutes, their music weaving soft threads through the hot air. The sound is gentle, repetitive, almost hypnotic. You might linger just beyond a doorway as dancers practice their movements, their bodies bending gracefully, anklets jingling with each step. It's mesmerizing, almost like watching a TikTok dance trend, except these steps have been practiced for generations. Designed not just for entertainment, but for pleasing the gods and the pharaoh himself. Your tasks pull you back to the practical. You might be sent to fetch fresh rushes to scatter across the floor, their green scent filling the hall. You may polish bronze vessels until they gleam, catching reflections like tiny suns. Or you may help prepare writing materials for scribes, smoothing papyrus sheets, refilling ink wells with soot mixed with water and gum, sharpening reed pens with small knives. To you, these symbols look like little drawings, but to the scribes, they are a universe. Sometimes you wonder what secrets are captured in their scrolls. Tax records, love letters, decrees. To hold writing is to hold power, and though you cannot read, you sense its weight as the day stretches on. The palace also becomes a place of instruction. You see young princes being led by tutors, their voices echoing as they recite lessons. They are dressed in fine linens, their heads shaved except for a single sidelock of hair that marks their youth. Their lessons are about history, about writing, about how to lead armies or appease the gods. To you, their world feels distant, yet strangely fragile. They stumble over words, fidget when bored, sneak glances out the windows toward the sunlight. In those moments, they seem less like gods in waiting and more like ordinary children, restless and curious. Meanwhile, in quieter chambers, officials discuss matters of state. You might carry in trays of food or refill cups, catching snatches of conversation about taxes, border skirmishes, or temple building projects. The words are heavy, the voice is serious, but to you, it is background noise, like overhearing office talk in a break room. Yet you know these discussions ripple outward, affecting lives across Egypt. Whether farmers will pay more in grain this year, whether soldiers will be called to march south or east. For servants, the palace is both vast and confining. You move through great halls with painted walls, past statues taller than 10 men, across courtyards that echo with chants and songs. And yet, your world is still small. You cannot leave at will. You cannot linger too long in places you are not needed. You live within the boundaries of service, a quiet shadow moving through brilliance. Still, there is humanity in it. In the afternoons, when duties slow for a brief moment, you might share a smile with another servant, or sneak a bite of fruit from a tray, sweet juice running down your chin. You might lean against a wall and let your thoughts drift to home, to the smell of the Nile at dusk, to your family's laughter, to the sound of frogs singing in the marshes. These memories are like little charms you carry, keeping you steady in the endless rhythm of palace life. The heat of the afternoon is relentless, though. Sweat clings to your back, and the air is heavy, almost shimmering. Guards fan themselves with small palm fronds, and even the officials dab their foreheads with linen cloths. Somewhere, a scribe sighs loudly as his ink smudges in the humidity. Everyone is waiting for the moment when the sun begins to sink, when shadows lengthen, and the world exhales. And yet, the palace does not sleep. Work continues, music drifts, and preparations for evening begin. You are sent to fetch oil for lamps, heavy clay jars that slosh with thick liquid. The lamps will be lit soon, casting flickering light across walls painted with gods and battles. The palace at night is a different world altogether, one you will soon step into. But before that, in these waning hours of the afternoon, there is always the possibility of surprise. A visitor might arrive unannounced, dusty from the desert road. A noble might demand entertainment to stave off boredom. Or the Pharaoh himself might emerge, his presence electrifying every chamber he passes through. You never know. That uncertainty keeps you alert, even when exhaustion tugs at your limbs. For now, you take a deep breath, inhaling the mingled scents of incense, cooking, and hot stone. The day has already been long, but it is far from over. Night will bring its own rituals, its own labors, its own stories whispered among servants in shadowed halls. But what about when the sun finally dips and the Kisung palace transforms under the glow of oil lamps? When servants' tasks shift from preparation to vigilance? That's what we'll explore in the next part. The sun has begun to soften, its golden light stretching long shadows across the courtyards. The oppressive heat of the day releases its grip little by little, and the palace shifts once more into a different rhythm. If the mornings were about ritual and order, and the afternoons about duty and activity, the evenings are about vigilance, about holding the palace together as darkness creeps in. For you, a servant, it is not an ending but a continuation. Another phase of the endless cycle that defines your life. Imagine the first lamps being lit, small clay bowls filled with oil, a strip of linen wick coiled gently inside. One by one, flames flicker to life, their light golden and uneven, shadows dancing across painted walls. The smell of burning oil is sharp, faintly bitter, mixing with the lingering traces of incense. Servants move quietly through the halls, balancing trays of lamps, placing them carefully along corridors, courtyards, and chambers. You are one of them, steadying your steps so the flame does not sputter out. Each lamp feels like a star being added to the night sky within the palace, pushing back against the vast dark that will soon settle over the desert. The palace at night is a place of contrasts. By day, it is full of noise and movement. By night, it feels more intimate, though never quiet. Guards shift to evening posts, their voices lower, more cautious. Musicians tune their instruments for softer songs, notes floating like whispers. Even the servants' footsteps seem hushed, though the work is no less demanding. You might be tasked with cleaning up after the day's feasts, sweeping away rushes from the floors, or carrying baskets of waste to be emptied outside the walls. These tasks are less glamorous, less visible, but no less necessary. The kitchens, too, change their tone. Fires burn lower, but not out. There are preparations for evening meals, and smaller trays of food for the pharaoh and his household. Imagine the aromas of roasted lamb, spiced lentils, figs stewed in honey, and flatbread still warm from the oven. You help arrange these dishes on trays, balancing them with care as you carry them into dimly lit halls. The flicker of lamplight glints on gold and bronze vessels, and shadows ripple across carved hieroglyphs that seem to watch from the walls. Sometimes, if fortune smiles, you might be given scraps when the trays return. A sweet date left uneaten, a crust of bread, a sip of cooled beer. For a servant, these are small luxuries, tiny sparks of joy in long days of labor. You share them quickly, discreetly, with others, laughing softly so no overseer hears. In those brief moments, humanity feels warm and simple, even inside a palace that demands perfection. But night in the palace is not only about food and cleaning. It is also a time of vigilance. Lamps must be checked constantly, wicks trimmed, oil refilled. The desert night may be cool, but it is filled with dangers. Snakes slither near walls, scorpions creep into shadowed corners, and even jackals may wander close to the outer gates. Guards patrol with spears and torches, and you sometimes accompany them, carrying extra oil or water. The silence of the night is not complete. It is filled with the distant croak of frogs from the Nile, the faint rustle of palm trees, and the occasional bark of a dog. Imagine walking through those courtyards, your sandals brushing against sand, the air cool against your skin, your only light a small, flickering flame. Inside the palace, some spaces grow livelier as night falls. Music drifts from certain chambers where nobles or guests gather. Harps, lutes, and flutes blend into melodies that feel softer than the daytime performances, more personal, almost like lullabies for the wealthy. Dancers move with grace, their shadows leaping and swaying on painted walls. You might be stationed outside such a chamber, waiting to carry trays or sweep floors, catching glimpses of entertainment that feel both otherworldly and achingly human. The laughter of nobles spills into the halls, a contrast to your own world of obedience and restraint. Sometimes, priests return for evening rituals. Torches flare in temple precincts as chants rise once again, offering protection through the night. The Egyptians feared darkness as the realm of chaos, where Apophis, the great serpent of disorder, sought to devour the sun. Rituals at night were like shields, words turned into weapons against the unseen. You might be tasked with carrying jars of oil or placing offerings at altars, the chants vibrating in your bones as you move silently through smoke and shadow. And then there is the Pharaoh. At night, he withdraws deeper into chambers guarded and veiled. You rarely see him at this hour, but his presence is still felt. His bedding is prepared with the finest linens, his chambers cooled with damp rush mats. Servants like you handle these items carefully, as though even a wrinkle in the fabric might invite punishment. His rest is not just his own. It is the rest of Egypt's divine ruler, the living God, and must be guarded with reverence. Guards double their watch outside his doors, and silence deepens in those hallways. Among servants, however, night carries a different rhythm. Once the day's main labors are finished, you gather quietly in small corners, sharing water, stretching weary limbs, telling stories in low voices. Tales of the Nile flooding, of crocodiles lurking in reeds, of gods who walk among men in disguise. You laugh quietly at jokes, tease each other about mistakes made earlier, or speculate on what gossip you overheard. These are the moments when your humanity breathes, away from the eyes of overseers. It feels almost like the ancient equivalent of scrolling through late-night memes, a way to relax, to find humor in the heaviness of the day. But there is also weariness. Your body aches, your eyelids grow heavy, yet the work does not truly end until dawn returns. The palace never sleeps entirely, and servants must always be ready. A lamp might gutter out, a guard might call, a noble might demand water in the middle of the night. You learn to rest in small fragments, to doze lightly while still listening for footsteps. Sleep, when it comes, is precious, but never deep. Imagine lying once more on your reed mat, the air cool now, carrying faint scents of smoke and river water. Around you, other servants breathe softly, some already asleep, others whispering faintly. The stars above are sharp and countless, visible through small open courtyards, reminders of how vast the desert sky is compared to the narrow world of palace walls. Your eyes close, and for a moment you drift, carried by exhaustion. Yet even as you sleep, the palace breathes on. Guards watching, priests chanting, lamps flickering. Life never stops here. It only shifts, like the Nile itself, moving from one rhythm to another. But what about the world outside the palace walls? The bustling city of Thebes or Memphis, where ordinary people lived and worked, the world your family might still inhabit. That's what we'll explore in the next part. Beyond the palace walls, the world continues with its own rhythm, a rhythm less gilded but no less essential. While you move through grand corridors and serve beneath painted ceilings, your family and countless others live in mud brick houses clustered along the narrow streets of the city. Tonight, let's wander beyond the gates in our imagination, slipping out into that world as quietly as if we were dreamers walking unseen. The city wakes early, even before the palace, because labor begins with the sun. Imagine narrow alleys packed with sounds, donkeys braying, Dogs barking, women calling to children to rise, pots clanging as breakfast is prepared. The air is thick with smells, baking bread, smoke from early fires, sweat already rising from bodies at work. The houses are simple, made of sun-dried mud brick, their roofs flat, and sometimes used as extra space for storage or sleeping in the cool night air. Chickens scratch in courtyards, goats bleat impatiently, and everywhere there is dust, stirred up by endless feet. Most people in the city are not nobles, not priests, not soldiers, but ordinary workers. Farmers, builders, potters, fishermen, weavers. Their lives are not written in gilded inscriptions, but they are the hands that keep Egypt alive. Consider the farmer who rises before dawn to walk to his fields. He carries a wooden plow, tied to an ox, his feet sinking into moist soil along the banks of the Nile. The flooding of the river has left rich black silt, and he presses seed into it with calloused hands. He does not see this as mere labor. It is part of the eternal cycle of Mat, the balance of life. Without him, the palace you serve would have no bread, no beer, no feasts. Fishermen row their small papyrus boats into the river, casting nets that glimmer with water in the morning sun. Their catch may be humble, tilapia, catfish, eels, but it fills bellies in the city. Children trail after them along the banks, laughing as they splash, sometimes catching small fish in woven baskets. It's a reminder that even in a world of gods and pharaohs, play has always been part of human life. In the marketplace, vendors set out their wares. Imagine walking through that space. Rows of stalls shaded by woven mats, the air buzzing with voices. There are figs and dates piled high, onions bundled together with reeds, clay jars of honey glistening in the sun. A potter sells simple bowls, their surfaces still smelling faintly of kill smoke. A weaver displays linen, coarse for workers, fine and sheer for those who can afford luxury. The noise is constant, haggling, laughter, the cry of sellers calling their goods. If the palace is a symphony of order, the marketplace is a drumbeat of chaos, but a joyous one. The ordinary homes themselves are small but practical. Step inside one in your mind. A central room with a hearth, clay jars stacked neatly, mats woven for reeds covering the floor. The walls smell faintly of smoke and earth. On the roof, baskets of grain are stored, protected under straw. Children tumble across the mats, chasing each other, while their mother kneads dough, shaping it into flat loaves to be baked on hot stones. The father sharpens tools or mends nets, pausing to sip beer from a clay cup. It is not the abundance of the palace, but it is life lived with rhythm and necessity. And then there are the craftsmen. The stonemason, his hands white with dust, chips carefully at a block that will one day be part of a tomb or temple. The carpenter shapes wood into furniture, smoothing it with flint tools until it gleams. The jeweler bends over tiny beads of faience, stringing them together into necklaces that will adorn both nobles and common folk. Each of these artisans leaves behind echoes that survive even thousands of years later. Think of how extraordinary it is. These hands, worn and calloused, created objects still displayed in museums today. They did not know their work would outlast empires, but in some way, they touched eternity. The city is also filled with sound beyond work. Children sing as they play chasing games. Dogs bark, guarding doorways. Priests chant in small shrines tucked into corners. Storytellers gather listeners in shaded courtyards, weaving tales of gods, battles, and heroes. It's the ancient version of watching a movie, a shared experience of imagination. People laugh, cry, and gasp together, carried by the rhythm of words. But the city is not only joy. Life is precarious. Disease spreads easily in close quarters, and medicine is limited. The healers rely on herbs, honey, and prayers, sometimes effective, sometimes not. Death is a frequent visitor, and families learn to live with grief woven into their days. Still, there is resilience. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and so even sorrow was softened by hope. To them, death was a doorway, not an ending. Festivals bring moments of relief and celebration. Imagine a procession moving through the streets, priests carrying statues of gods, draped in linens, followed by musicians banging drums and cymbals. People line the streets, clapping, cheering, offering food and flowers. Beer flows freely, songs rise into the sky, and for a brief time, everyone shares in joy, regardless of station. Servants, farmers, artisans, even scribes, all join together, dancing until their feet ache. These festivals remind them that they are not just laborers, but part of a cosmic story, connected to gods and Pharaoh alike. For you, a palace servant, the city is both familiar and distant. You may visit your family on rare days, slipping back into their humble home, sharing meals and laughter. But you never quite belong in either world fully. The palace shapes you into something else, quiet, cautious, always alert. Yet the city keeps you human, reminding you of laughter, struggle, and warmth. It is a balance, one that is both comforting and lonely. As night falls in the city, torches flicker along the streets. Families gather on rooftops to sleep under the stars, their laughter echoing across alleys until it softens into snores. Dogs curl into corners, and the Nile glimmers faintly in the moonlight. Life, in all its fragility and persistence, continues. And while the city sleeps, the palace remains awake, guarded and glowing, its rituals never ending. Inside those walls, your duties will resume with each sunrise, linking you always to the divine. But how did the Egyptians imagine that divine world? Their myths, their gods, their stories of life and death that gave meaning to every chore and every festival? That's what we'll explore in the next part. To understand the life of a servant in the palace, you must also understand the stories that shaped the very air they breathed. Ancient Egypt was not simply a land of stone and sand, but of gods who walked invisibly beside mortals, of myths that explained why the sun rose, why the Nile flooded, and why order had to be guarded against chaos. For a servant, these stories were not just entertainment told around fires. They were the invisible rules of existence, guiding every action, every ritual, every offering of bread and beer. Imagine sitting in a quiet courtyard at the end of a long day. Other servants gather around, their shoulders tired, their voices hushed. A storyteller, perhaps an older worker with a gift for weaving words, begins to recount the tale of Osiris, Isis, and Set. His voice is calm, rhythmic, and in the flickering lamplight, shadows seem to act out the story on the walls. He tells how Osiris, the good king, was murdered by his jealous brother Set, and how Isis, devoted and clever, pieced him together with love and magic, bringing him back to rule the afterlife. For servants, this story is more than a myth. It is a reassurance. If Osiris could rise again, then perhaps ordinary mortals, too, would find life beyond death. These myths saturate every corner of palace life. When you help place bread and beer on an altar, you remember that these were the very foods offered to gods to sustain them. When you sweep floors, you are not just cleaning, you are clearing space where divine order, may flow without interruption. Even the simple act of lighting a lamp becomes part of the eternal struggle. Flame against darkness, order against chaos, Re against Apophis. The god Re, who sails across the sky each day in his sun bark, is a constant presence. By day, you feel his heat on your skin, relentless and golden. By night, you know he travels the underworld, facing monsters to ensure dawn returns. Servants often glance at the horizon at sunset, whispering prayers without being told, trusting that Ra will rise again. It is a daily hope, quiet but profound. Then there is Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and motherhood. Whenever music drifts through the halls, the plucking of a harp, the jingle of dancers' anklets, you feel she is near. Her presence makes laughter possible, even in places of hardship. Servants often carry amulets of her, small carvings or beads, believing she will soften the hearts of harsh overseers or protect them from despair. There are also darker gods and spirits, whispered about in corners. Set, lord of storms and violence, is blamed when tempers flare, when floods destroy instead of nourish, when wars drag men away from their families. Tawret, the hippopotamus goddess, protects women in childbirth, her fierce image carved into charms worn by mothers. And Anubis, jackal-headed and silent, is a constant reminder that death is never far. Imagine walking through a corridor and seeing his image painted on a wall, black ears pricked, eyes watchful. He is frightening yet comforting, for he promises guidance through death's long corridors. These myths are not distant. They are woven into festivals, into songs, into the very duties you perform each day. When the Nile floods, it is not just a river rising. It is Hapi, the god of the Nile, blessing the land with his bounty. When the pharaoh wears the crown, it is not just a man adorned. It is Horus himself, falcon-eyed and eternal, ruling through human form. For a servant, these beliefs shape loyalty. You do not just serve a king. You serve the embodiment of Horus, the mediator between gods and men. And yet, within these divine stories, there are human truths that resonate deeply. Take the story of Isis searching the earth for the pieces of Osiris, grieving yet refusing to give up. Servants know that kind of loyalty, that kind of perseverance. Or the story of Ra growing old, his power waning while mankind plots against him. Even gods, it seems, can grow weary, just as mortals do after endless labor. These echoes blur the line between the divine and the human, reminding you that struggle and hope are universal. Sometimes in the palace, visiting storytellers or priests will recite from the Book of the Dead. Imagine listening to those words by lamplight, your body aching from work, but your mind drifting through visions of the afterlife. The book describes fields of reeds where the dead plow forever in peace, harvests are abundant, and families are reunited. For servants who toil in real fields under the burning sun, the idea of eternal harvest without hunger is a promise sweeter than honey. Even judgment after death carries imagery that feels immediate. You picture your heart being weighed on scales against the feather of Maat, truth itself. If your heart is heavy with wrongdoing, Amit the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waits to consume it. But if your heart is light, you pass into paradise. It's a terrifying but comforting idea that fairness continues beyond life. For a servant often unseen, often unthanked, it is hoped that their quiet goodness might be rewarded when earthly masters cannot. You might smile at how these myths, though ancient, mirror things we know today. The weighing of the heart is not so different from modern notions of karma, of good deeds balancing against bad. The story of Ora battling Apophis each night is not unlike the way we think of each day as a new battle against exhaustion or despair, and the idea of gods who laugh, cry, fight. And love makes them feel as relatable as characters in a long-running television series, except this series has lasted for millennia. For you, a servant, these stories are not just background. They are the very fabric of meaning. When you wash the Pharaoh's garments, you remember that he wears them as Horus, not just as a man. When you carry water, you imagine it blessed by Hapi, flowing with divine generosity. When you collapse at the end of the day, too tired to speak, you whisper a prayer to Anubis that he watch your dreams, guiding you safely through the night's shadows. And always, there is the whisper of eternity. Every object you touch, every temple you pass, Every statue looming above you is built not just for the present, but for forever. The Egyptians believed that names carved into stone ensured immortality. That is why the pharaoh's name gleams on every wall, why officials crave inscriptions. For servants, immortality may come in other ways, in the love of family, in whispered stories that survive a generation or two. Yet still, the hope lingers. Perhaps the gods, in their mercy, will remember the nameless too. But what about the spaces of death themselves? The tombs and pyramids that servants sometimes glimpsed in construction. Vast monuments built stone by stone under the desert sun? How did those structures shape the lives of ordinary workers? And what did they reveal about Egypt's obsession with eternity? That's what we'll explore in the next part. The monuments of Egypt rise out of the desert like frozen waves of stone, each block heavy with both labor and belief. To serve the pharaoh is one thing, but to build his tomb, that is to serve eternity itself. Tonight, let's walk in imagination from the palace toward the vast fields of stone where pyramids, temples, and tombs dominate the horizon. For a servant, even if you were not a builder yourself, a sight of these colossal projects was constant, a reminder that life was short and memory was forever. Imagine the sun blazing overhead, reflecting off pale limestone blocks so bright you have to squint. The air tastes of dust, fine grit that clings to your tongue and makes your throat ache. All around, the ground trembles faintly with the rhythm of thousands of feet. Workers strain with ropes, pulling sledges loaded with stone. Overseers shout, their voices carrying in the dry air. The creak of wood, the scrape of rope, the steady grunt of men pulling in unison, it is a symphony of labor. And you hear it even from a distance. For you, as a palace servant, you are not the one hauling the stones. But you pass near these works when errands take you toward the river or markets. The pyramids and temples loom as constant reminders of what the pharaoh's life means beyond the palace. He is not only the living God, he is also the one who must be prepared for eternity. Every loaf of bread you serve him, every cup of beer poured at his table, every linen washed for his body, will one day be echoed in offerings placed at his tomb. Your daily chores are small mirrors of the eternal ones. The workers at the pyramids are often not slaves, as we might imagine from modern tailies, but laborers drafted from across the country, serving their corvée duty. Farmers during the Nile's flood season, when fields cannot be tilled, come here instead, trading idle months for work on the great projects. They are fed bread, beer, and onions, their rations simple but steady. Imagine thousands of people living in temporary villages beside the site, their homes built of mud brick, their evenings filled with laughter, songs, and gossip despite the aches in their muscles. Even in labor, community thrives at the worksite. Engineers and architects direct the flow of stone, measuring angles with cords and sighting tools. Their knowledge as precise as any modern builder's. Servants like you might carry water to workers, or bring messages from the palace, or help prepare food in the bustling kitchens that feed the crews. The scale is overwhelming. To stand at the base of a half-built pyramid is to feel small, almost swallowed by ambition itself. The blocks are taller than you, heavier than entire herds of oxen, and yet they rise, layer upon layer, into a staircase for the soul of the pharaoh. And it is not only pyramids. Temples rise with towering columns painted in bright reds, blues, and golds, colors that have faded now in history, but once gleamed under the sun. Tombs are cut into cliffs, hidden valleys filled with winding corridors, painted with scenes of gods and the afterlife. Servants sometimes accompany nobles to these places, carrying supplies or sweeping dust. You walk through halls where the walls themselves seem alive. Ra's bark gliding across painted skies, Anubis tending to the dead, Hathor welcoming souls with open arms. The art is not decoration. It is magic, a way of ensuring these scenes happen forever in the world beyond. Imagine pausing in such a corridor, your torchlight flickering against painted eyes that seem to watch you back. You feel a shiver, not from fear, but from awe. These places are not meant for you, but in serving, you glimpse eternity. And perhaps you wonder, if so much effort is made for the Pharaoh's afterlife, what waits for the servant, whose tomb may be no more than a shallow grave, marked with a simple stone? Still, hope lingers, for the gods see hearts, not wealth. Construction itself is a marvel. Ramps rise alongside pyramids, stretching into the sky, made of mud brick and rubble. Workers drag sledges up these ramps, water poured on sand to reduce friction. The science is practical, ingenious. To a servant, it might seem like magic, stones moving as though pulled by unseen hands. And yet, behind every miracle is sweat, calluses, and discipline. At the top, masons chip edges, fitting blocks together so tightly that even a blade of grass could not slip between dot at night. The building site's quiet, fires dotting the horizon like stars on the ground. Workers sit in circles, drinking beer, eating bread, telling stories. Some play flutes, their music soft and plaintive. Laughter rises, echoing faintly across the desert. From the palace, you might look out and see those distant fires. Tiny flickers, marking the boundary between the world of the living and the world being built for eternity. For servants, there is pride even in the distance. You are part of this system, even if indirectly. The bread you help grind may feed workers. The linen you wash may one day wrap the Pharaoh. The small tasks in your daily life ripple outward to these colossal projects. It is a humbling thought that your aching hands, unnoticed by most, are threads in a grand tapestry that will stand for millennia. Of course, gossip reaches you even here. Stories of accidents, a block falling, men crushed, whispers of overseers harsh with whips, or workers stealing extra rations. There are also tales of camaraderie, of men helping each other when ropes slip, of songs sung in unison to lighten loads. Work is work, no matter the century. The blend of hardship and humor, struggle and solidarity is timeless. Standing in the shadow of a pyramid, you feel both small and significant. Small, because the stones dwarf you. Significant, because you are alive in this moment, part of the great machine of Egypt. You imagine the Pharaoh's body resting here one day, wrapped in linens, surrounded by gold and treasures, his name carved deep into stone. You imagine priests chanting for centuries, servants bringing offerings long after you are gone. And you wonder, will the gods also remember the nameless who carried water, who swept floors, who kept the lamps burning? Perhaps they will. For in Egyptian belief, Mat is balance, and balance cannot exist without every hand playing its part. The Pharaoh may shine like the sun, but even the sun relies on the horizon to rise. You, the servant, are that horizon. But what about the smaller rituals of everyday life? The food eaten at dawn and dusk, the clothes worn by both servants and nobles, the simple tools that shaped existence far more than pyramids ever did? That's what we'll explore in the next part. The grandeur of pyramids and temples is dazzling, but the texture of daily life is found in smaller details. The bread baked in clay ovens, the scratch of linen against skin, the weight of a simple tool in calloused hands. For a palace servant, these little things shape every hour of every day, grounding you in the ordinary, even as you serve the extraordinary. Tonight, let's step away from the monumental and wander through the quieter rituals of food, clothing, and tools, the things that sustained Egypt in its rhythm. Imagine waking at dawn once more, and the first thought is not of gold or gods, but of hunger. Bread is life in Egypt. It is the first thing baked in the morning, the last thing eaten at night, and the food that carries you through the endless labor. You help grind grain on a saddle quern, pressing stone against stone, the sound a steady scrape that becomes background music to your existence. Dust clings to your arms, fine and irritating, and when you rub your skin, it leaves gray streaks. The flour produced is not white and soft, but coarse, speckled with grit from the stone. When baked, it produces a loaf that is filling but rough, sometimes so sandy it wears down your teeth. Archaeologists have found skulls with molars ground to the root, a testament to how daily bread was both a blessing and a curse. The bread is eaten with beer, thick and porridge-like, brewed from barley. It smells sour, tastes earthy, and leaves a faint tang on your tongue. But it nourishes and refreshes in the heat. You drink it from clay cups, the rough surface cool against your hands. Alongside bread and beer, you eat onions, garlic, lentils, cucumbers, and occasionally dried fish. For the pharaoh and nobles, the menu is far richer. Roasted duck, honeyed cakes, dates dripping with sweetness, and wine imported in jars sealed with resin. As a servant, you may glimpse these foods on trays, their aromas teasing your senses, but your own meals remain humble. Yet even humble food carries ritual. When you place loaves before the household gods in the palace, you remember that these offerings echo the eternal feasts of the afterlife. Eating is not only survival, it is participation in the cosmic balance. Each crumb, each sip of beer, ties the human to the divine. Clothing, too, defines your days. For servants, it is the simplest linen kilts or shifts, woven from flax grown along the Nile. The fabric is light, breathable, and essential in the relentless heat. When new, it is white and crisp, but soon it stains with sweat, smoke, and dust, and you scrub it in river water until it thins. Imagine the feel of wet linen drying stiff in the sun and softening again against your skin. For higher ranks, the linen is sheer, fine as gauze, layered into elegant drapes. Nobles wear pleated kilts, fringes, and robes that flow when they walk. Jewelry gleams against their skin. Collars of faience beads, gold rings, amulets shaped like ankhs or scarabs. Wigs, made of human hair or plant fiber, are oiled and perfumed, giving them a glossy sheen. For servants, wigs are rare, but you handle them carefully when tending to your masters, their strands smooth beneath your fingers. Shoes are almost non-existent in your world. You walk barefoot, your soles toughened by stone and sand. Nobles sometimes wear sandals made of leather or woven papyrus, their straps creaking faintly with each step. To a servant, the sight of delicate sandals is almost amusing, because you know they would crumble quickly in real labor. Your feet, scarred and dusty, are the real tools that carry Egypt forward. Speaking of tools, they are everywhere, in your hands and in the hands of those around you. The broom you sweep with is a bundle of palm fibers bound tightly, leaving streaks of dust as you move it across stone floors. The jars you carry water in are made of clay, rough and porous, heavy even when empty. You balance them against your hip or shoulder, learning to move with a sway that keeps them steady. In the kitchens, knives of copper or flint chop herbs and meat, their edges dulled quickly by constant use. You sharpen them with stones, feeling the rasping vibration in your fingertips. Every tool has its rhythm. The quern stone grinds grain with a scraping sigh. The loom creaks as weavers pass threads back and forth, their fingers nimble, their concentration intense. The carpenter's mallet thuds steadily, shaping wood into stools or chests. These sounds are the heartbeat of Egypt, constant and familiar. As much a part of life as the croak of frogs by the Nile dot, there are moments of ingenuity. Two small marvels you witness without perhaps realizing how clever they are. Water is lifted from the river using shadoofs, long poles with counterweights, swinging gracefully as buckets rise and spill into irrigation channels. Nets are thrown in wide arcs to catch fish, emotion practiced and fluid. Potter's wheels spin under steady feet, clay rising into smooth jars as if by magic. These simple devices make labor possible, but to you, they are just part of the scenery, as natural as the sun itself. Even cosmetics play a role in daily life. Yes, even servants use them when possible. Kohl, made of galena, lines eyes not just for beauty, but to reduce glare from the sun and ward off infections. The coolness of the black powder against your eyelids is soothing, and it gives your face a sharp, defined look. Women and men alike use scented oils to soften skin parched by the desert. Perfumes made from lotus or myrrh sometimes drift through the palace, clinging to the garments of nobles. For you, a touch of oil is a small luxury, a defense against both dryness and fatigue. And woven through all of this, humor persists. Servants joke about bread so hard it could be used as a weapon, or about sandals too flimsy for real work. They tease each other when a jar is dropped, or when someone sneaks a bite of food meant for the nobles. These jokes are light, almost silly, but they are survival tools in their own way. In a life defined by labor, laughter is as precious as bread. The ordinary things, bread, linen, tools, jokes, might seem small compared to pyramids or pharaohs. Yet they are the true foundation of Egypt. Without them, the grand palaces and temples would crumble, for gods are honored only through human hands. And eternity is built stone by stone, loaf by loaf, stitch by stitch. But what about leisure? The rare moments when servants and common folk stepped away from work, the games they played, the songs they sang, the simple joys that reminded them they were more than laborers. That's what we'll explore in the next part. Even in a world ruled by labor, by rituals, and by the constant demands of palace life, there were moments of joy. Humans cannot exist on work alone, and even the lowest servant found ways to carve out time for laughter, games, music, and the warmth of companionship. These were not luxuries so much as necessities, reminders that life was meant to be savored, even in fleeting ways. Tonight, let's drift into the quieter hours when work loosened its grip and Egyptians, from servants to nobles, turned toward play and leisure. Imagine a servant's day drawing down toward night. The lamps are lit, the floors swept, the trays cleared. Overseers' voices grow less sharp. Guards lean against their spears, and the atmosphere softens. In the corners of the palace where servants gather, someone produces small knuckle bones, the ancient equivalent of dice. You toss them gently onto the floor, laughing at the way they scatter. Sometimes it is a game of luck, other times a test of skill, but always it sparks smiles. The rattle of bones against stone is a sound that carries through the centuries. As familiar to us as the shuffle of cards or the roll of dice today, there are other games too. Board games carved from wood or stone, with grids marked by careful lines. The most famous is Senet, a game of movement and fate, played by pharaohs and servants alike. Imagine crouching in the dim light, moving little carved pieces across the board. The rules are partly chance, partly strategy, and the game itself is steeped in spiritual meaning. Each move echoes the journey of the soul through the afterlife, and winning feels like a small triumph against chaos. Even if you don't fully understand this symbolism, you feel its weight. To play is not just to pass time, but to practice eternity. Music is another joy, woven seamlessly into life. Harps, lutes, flutes, and drums fill the air at festivals, banquets, or simple gatherings. As a servant, you hear music often, drifting from noble halls, echoing in temple courtyards, or rising spontaneously among workers. The melodies are repetitive, hypnotic, designed as much to soothe as to entertain. When musicians play for nobles, you slip quietly in and out with trays, catching fragments of tunes that linger in your memory long after. Sometimes, in stolen moments, servants hum these songs to each other, turning noble entertainment into shared comfort. Dancing is equally common. Formal dances in the palace are graceful, rehearsed, precise, a performance for gods and pharaohs. But among servants, the dances are freer, more playful. Imagine clapping your hands in rhythm as someone spins clumsily, laughing until tears roll down cheeks. For a few minutes, the aches of labor vanish, replaced by the pure joy of movement. Even children in the streets dance, their feet kicking up dust, their laughter as rhythmic as any drum. Storytelling is perhaps the oldest and most cherished leisure. Servants gather at night in small groups, the glow of a single lamp or torch lighting their faces. An elder, with a voice weathered by years, begins to tell tales. Some are myths of gods, but many are stories of clever peasants outwitting officials, or animals teaching lessons. You lean in, captivated, forgetting the soreness of your body as words transport you. Storytelling is entertainment, but also education. It teaches values, sharpens wit, and connects you to generations past. In a way, it is the ancient version of a shared movie night, except the screen is imagination itself. Leisure is not just games and stories, though. It is also the simple act of sitting with others, sharing food and laughter. You recall evenings with your family, gathered on the roof of your modest home, the cool night breeze brushing against your skin. The stars stretch endlessly above, clearer than any modern city sky. You chew on bread, sip beer, and talk softly about the day. These small moments are the true treasures of life. Unremarkable, ordinary, but full of warmth. There is also leisure in festivals, when entire cities transform into stages of celebration. Priests carry statues of gods through the streets. Drums thunder, cymbals clash, and crowds cheer. Servants, freed for a few hours from routine, dance in the streets, their bodies moving in rhythm with the chaos. Beer flows generously, bread is shared, and laughter fills the air. Imagine the joy of losing yourself in that tide of humanity, knowing that for one day, everyone is united in celebration, no matter their rank. It is noisy, messy, and exuberant, the closest thing to a holiday parade in our own time. Even sports and physical play have their place. Young men wrestle in courtyards, their bodies straining in friendly combat. Children play at mock battles with sticks for spears. Some swim in the Nile, their shouts echoing across the water, splashing each other in play. Servants occasionally join in, though always cautiously, mindful not to draw reprimand. Still, there is laughter in these games, a release of energy after long hours of toil. And then, of course, there is the quiet leisure of beauty. Women, and sometimes men, paint their eyes with kohl, rub perfumed oils into their skin, or braid their hair in intricate patterns. For nobles, these are signs of wealth. For servants, even a dab of oil or a simple braid is a luxury, a small act of dignity and self-expression. You might catch a glimpse of yourself reflected faintly in polished bronze, smiling at the way the kohl darkens your eyes, feeling a moment of pride in your appearance despite your simple clothing. Leisure, then, is not absence of work, but the reclaiming of humanity. It is the games that remind you life is not only labor, the music that lifts you beyond fatigue, the stories that connect you to gods and ancestors, the laughter that dissolves pain. In those moments, you are not just a servant. You are fully human, alive, and part of a timeless rhythm that will outlast even pyramids. But what about family life? The bonds between parents and children, husbands and wives, the quiet joys and sorrows of the household? What did it mean to be part of a family in a world where duty to Pharaoh and gods often outweighed personal freedom? That's what we'll explore in the next part. If work filled the days and ritual filled the palace, it was family that filled the heart. Even for a servant whose hours were long and whose duties pressed like stone, the thought of family waiting at home, or memories of those already gone, offered a quiet anchor. Tonight, Let's slip from the palace corridors into the humbler world of Egyptian family life, the households where laughter and loss mingled together, where bonds of kinship carried people through the dust and heat of existence. Imagine stepping into a modest home at dusk, its mud brick walls glowing warm in the fading light. The doorway is low, the roof flat, and inside, the rooms are simple but full of life. A central hearth smolders, the smoke curling upward and seeping through holes in the ceiling. The air smells of bread, baking on hot stones, and lentils simmering in a clay pot. Children tumble across reed mats, their laughter ringing clear, their bare feet scuffing the floor. Goats bleat in a corner, tied loosely, their presence as much a part of the family as any child. The family structure is both familiar and different. Husbands and wives often share responsibility for running the home. Women hold significant roles, more than in many other ancient cultures. They can own property, sign contracts, and even divorce if marriage falters. A wife tends the hearth, bakes bread, brews beer, weaves linen. A husband farms, fishes, or works in the service of nobles. But they are partners in survival, each task woven together into the fabric of daily life. You might picture a couple sitting side by side on their roof in the cool evening, sharing bread, sipping beer, their bodies weary, but their companionship steady. Children are both joy and necessity. From a young age, they help in small ways, gathering firewood, carrying water, shooing chickens from gardens. Their laughter brings warmth to the house, but their labor brings survival. Imagine a little girl proudly carrying a small jar of water from the Nile, staggering slightly under its weight, her grin wide when she succeeds. Or a boy practicing with a toy bow, dreaming of one day hunting birds like his father. Their games are not frivolous, but practice for adulthood. Names carry meaning. Parents choose names that honor gods or reflect hopes. Merira, beloved of Ra. Hori, born of Horus. These names are blessings spoken aloud each day. When you call your child's name across a courtyard, you are not just summoning them. You are invoking divine favor. Family life also carries rituals. Women hang amulets of Tauret, a hippopotamus goddess of childbirth, near their beds to protect against the dangers of labor. When a child is born, neighbors gather to celebrate, bringing bread and small gifts. The baby is washed in Nile water, swaddled in linen, and placed gently in the arms of its mother, who whispers prayers to Hathor for health and long life. Imagine the quiet pride of a servant father holding his newborn for the first time, rough hands trembling as they cradle fragile life. But family is not only about joy. Death visits often. Infants do not always survive, and adults fall to fevers or injuries. Grief is woven into the rhythm of life, softened by the Egyptian belief that the dead continue in the afterlife. Families build small shrines in their homes with painted stele or clay figurines. Bread, beer, and flowers are placed before them, offerings to ancestors who are still part of the household. You whisper to them at night, seeking their guidance, their blessing. Death does not sever bonds. It only changes them. Meals are central to family life. Imagine the household gathered on mats, sharing bowls of lentils, carrying bread with their hands, dipping it into stews. Beer flows in small clay cups, passed around with laughter. There is no cutlery, only fingers, and the warmth of eating together binds everyone. Even scraps taste rich when shared with loved ones. You recall these meals even when serving lavish feasts in the palace. And though your belly aches with hunger at times, your heart remembers the joy of simple meals eaten in companionship. Festivals are family events too. You take your children to the riverbank to watch processions of gods. They gape at the statues draped in linens, the musicians beating drums, the dancers twirling with ribbons. Their eyes widen with awe, their voices rising in cheers. You laugh at their excitement, your own spirit lifted by their joy. These moments, though rare, leave memories as lasting as carved stone. Even work connects to family. You might carve a small toy for your child from leftover wood, or braid a string of beads from faience scraps discarded by jewelers. Children treasure these simple gifts, carrying them in pockets or around their necks like treasures. A doll made of cloth, a ball of woven reeds. These are the playthings that carry love. Love itself is spoken openly. Egyptian love poems, scratched onto pottery shards or written on papyrus, speak tenderly of longing, of beauty, of affection. Imagine a servant whispering such words to his wife as they sit on the roof, stars above, laughter of neighbors drifting through the night. She is more dazzling than beer, one poem says, a compliment both humorous and deeply sincere. Love in Egypt was not only duty, it was passion, sweetness, laughter, and devotion. Still, family life has its tensions. Marriages sometimes falter, disputes over property or loyalty erupt. But the system allows separation, and people remarry. Life is pragmatic, bending but not breaking. Children move between households, carrying their laughter wherever they go. Through it all, the household remains the center of existence, fragile, humble, but strong enough to withstand the desert's harshness. As a servant, you straddle two worlds. In the palace, you are part of an endless machine, one cog among thousands. At home, you are a father, mother, son, daughter, known by name, loved for yourself. These roles sometimes clash. You may miss festivals, miss births, miss meals, because the palace requires your presence. Guilt lingers, but so does pride. Serving the pharaoh brings honor, and perhaps in some way, that honor reflects back onto your family. And when you sleep, you dream of both worlds, the palace with its grandeur and the humble home with its warmth. You wake each morning to return to labor, but your heart carries the memory of family, like a talisman tucked quietly in your chest. Family, in the end, is what keeps you human. The palace may demand your body, the gods may demand your loyalty, but family holds your soul. It is in their laughter, their prayers, their small hands clutching yours, that you find the strength to rise again tomorrow. But what about health, sickness, and the ways Egyptians cared for the body, from herbs and prayers to the curious practices of early medicine? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Life in ancient Egypt was never guaranteed, not even within the sturdy walls of the palace. Illness, injury, and exhaustion walked beside everyone, from the pharaoh in his gilded chamber to the servant grinding grain on a reed mat. Tonight, let's step into the world of health and medicine, a blend of practical herbs, spiritual prayers, and remedies that sound strange to us now but were, in their own time, lifelines against the uncertainty of the body. Imagine waking with a sore throat after 2, many nights breathing smoke from oil lamps. Your voice rasps, your chest feels heavy. In modern times, you might reach for cough drops or tea, but in Egypt, you turn to garlic and honey. Garlic is crushed into paste, mixed with sweet honey, and swallowed slowly, its sharpness burning slightly before soothing. The taste lingers, pungent yet comforting, and you believe, as all Egyptians do, that this mixture carries both healing and divine blessing. Medicine here is not separated from religion. To heal the body is also to restore the balance of Mat, the cosmic order. Priests trained in healing recite spells as they apply poultices. Words themselves are thought to carry power. Imagine lying on a mat, an ache in your stomach, as a priest chants softly, his voice low and rhythmic, while he presses a mixture of herbs onto your belly. You do not know whether it is the herbs or the words that help. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But the comfort of being cared for eases the pain regardless. Egyptian healers use what nature provides. Willow bark for fevers, much like aspirin today. Juniper berries for digestion. Aloe for burns, its cool gel soothing sun-scorched skin. Honey for wounds, its natural antiseptic qualities unknown to them, but effective all the same. Malachite and other minerals are ground and used as eye salves, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful. Imagine the coolness of paste brushed gently on swollen eyes, the relief when pain subsides even slightly. There are stranger remedies too. Crocodile dung mixed with honey, applied as a contraceptive. Ox liver pressed to the eyes for blindness. Spells that call upon Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of plague, asking her to turn her fierce wrath away. To us, these cures seem odd, but in a world where the line between sickness and spirits blurred, they made perfect sense out in the palace. Servants are vulnerable. Long hours on your feet leave your joints aching. Heavy jars bruise your shoulders. Smoke from kitchens stings your eyes. Grinding grain fills your lungs with dust. Sometimes you cut your hands on pottery shards, or burn your skin when lifting trays too close to fire. These small injuries are constant companions. You treat them quickly with honey, oils, or linen bandages, then return to work. There is no pause for recovery. The palace waits for no one, and yet, even among hardship, there is care. Fellow servants help each other, sharing herbs, brewing infusions, whispering charms. Mothers teach daughters recipes for remedies. Fathers teach sons how to bind wounds. Knowledge passes down like heirlooms, each generation adding its own wisdom. You might recall your grandmother crushing herbs in a small mortar, her hands steady, her voice murmuring prayers as she worked. Those memories guide you now in the palace, far from home. Dentistry, or what passed for it, was particularly important. Bread full of grit from grinding stones wore teeth down painfully. Imagine chewing daily on loaves that scratch and grind against your molars until your gums swell. Healers sometimes drill small holes to drain abscesses, or pack cavities with herbs and resins. Pain relief might come from opium poppy, chewed or brewed into a bitter drink. It dulls the ache, softens the edges of reality, and for a while, you can work again. Women's health is treated with both practicality and reverence. Midwives assist in childbirth, guided by amulets of Taurat and spells to ease labor. Childbirth is dangerous, but mothers trust in herbs like fenugreek and dates to strengthen their bodies. Imagine a servant woman in the palace giving birth in a small chamber, other women surrounding her, chanting prayers, burning incense, rubbing her back with oil. A baby's first cry pierces the air, and relief washes over everyone, for both child and mother have survived. Illness is sometimes blamed on spirits or curses. Amulets shaped like scarabs or eyes are worn against disease, their cool stone pressed against the skin. If sickness persists, priests perform rituals, burning incense, sprinkling holy water, tracing protective symbols. For servants, these rituals offer hope even when medicine fails. Faith is as powerful as herbs, for it steadies the heart in times of fear. Death, when it comes, is met not with silence, but with preparation. The body is washed, wrapped in linen, and given to embalmers if the family can afford it. Even the poorest families try to honor the dead with care, for they believe the body is needed in the afterlife. You might place bread, beer, and amulets with your loved one, whispering promises that you will meet again in the field of reeds. For servants, these funerals are both grief and reassurance. Death is not an end, but a passage, a crossing into a world where pain no longer follows. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about Egyptian medicine is its humanity. While overseers may be harsh, while nobles may ignore the suffering of servants, the healers and families treat even the smallest illness with dignity. A cut finger is bound, a fever cooled, a cough soothed. Every effort is made to restore balance, to bring comfort. In a way, it feels like the earliest form of universal care, imperfect but heartfelt. Modern medicine might scoff at many of these remedies, yet some still resonate. Willow bark for fever, honey for wounds, garlic for infection. These are remedies still known to us today. It is a reminder that human curiosity and care have always searched for healing, even with limited tools. The Egyptians may not have understood germs or blood flow, but they understood suffering, and they tried to ease it. For a palace servant, health was fragile, always at risk from exhaustion, accidents, or disease. But care, whether through herbs, spells, or prayers, was always close at hand. You rose each day not knowing what ailment might strike, but you trusted in the rhythm of remedies, in the wisdom of ancestors, and in the mercy of gods. But what about dreams, the strange visions that came when servants and nobles finally closed their eyes at night? The Egyptians believed dreams were not random, but messages, glimpses of gods, or warnings for the future. What did it mean to dream in a world where every vision was a sign? That's what we'll explore in the next part. When the lamps are finally dimmed and the palace falls into uneasy silence, servants and nobles alike retreat to sleep. Yet for the Egyptians, sleep was not simply rest. It was a doorway. Dreams were not idle fragments of the mind, but messages from gods, ancestors, or forces unseen. Tonight, let's wander into that world of visions, where the boundaries between reality and imagination blurred, and where a servant might wake trembling or smiling, depending on what their spirit encountered in the night. Imagine lying on your reed mat in a dark chamber. The air is cooler now, a faint breeze drifting in through small open windows. Around you, other servants breathe steadily, some snoring softly, their exhaustion deeper than any dream. You close your eyes, and quickly, the day's aches begin to melt into half-sleep. In this in-between state, shapes form. Perhaps you see the Nile, swelling with flood, its waters reflecting stars. Perhaps you see the Pharaoh, towering and radiant, his face glowing like the sun. Or perhaps you see something stranger, a crocodile, standing upright, speaking in a voice that is not its own. To you, this is not random. Every detail carries weight. Every image is a symbol. Egyptians believed dreams were portals of communication. Gods might visit in visions, offering guidance or warning. A dream of Ra, shining with golden light, was a blessing. A dream of Osiris might mean protection in the afterlife. A dream of Anubis, jackal-headed and silent, could be a reminder to live truthfully, for the weighing of the heart awaited all. For a servant, to wake from such dreams was to feel touched by the divine, as though the gods themselves had stepped into your chamber. But not all dreams were gentle. Nightmares were thought to be attacks by restless spirits or signs of disorder creeping into life. Imagine dreaming of falling endlessly into sand, or being chased by a lion through desert cliffs. You wake with your heart pounding, sweat on your brow, and you whisper quickly to ward off evil. Amulets placed beside your bed, shaped like scarabs or eyes, are thought to protect you from such visions, keeping chaos at bay while you sleep. There were professional interpreters of dreams, men and women trained to read the language of symbols. They consulted dream books, papyrus scrolls that listed possible visions and their meanings. If you dreamed of eating crocodile meat, it meant wealth was coming. If you dreamed of losing teeth, it meant the death of a relative. If you dreamed of drinking warm beer, it could signal illness. Imagine waking, puzzled by a dream, and sharing it with a friend who repeats a saying they learned from such a book, giving you either comfort or warning. For servants, dreams could be escape. Your body was bound to duty, but in sleep you could soar. You might dream of sailing a boat down the Nile, cool wind against your face, laughter echoing across the water. You might dream of feasting, tables heavy with food you never tasted in life. These dreams offered joy, even if only temporary, and you woke feeling nourished by the memory. In this way, dreams were the entertainment of the night, the cinema of the ancient world, except the screen was your own mind. Some believed dreams could heal. Priests of certain temples practiced dream incubation, where those seeking cures slept in sacred chambers. They hoped the gods would send visions with remedies. Imagine lying on a mat in a cool stone temple, incense curling above, whispering prayers before drifting into sleep. You hope to see Imhotep, the deified healer, or Sekhmet, inner gentler. Form, giving instructions on herbs to drink or rituals to perform. Whether healing came or not, the faith in such dreams brought comfort, and sometimes comfort itself was enough. Even the pharaoh valued dreams. Stories tell of kings receiving visions from gods who promised victory in battle or instructed them to build temples. A single dream could alter the course of Egypt, shaping wars, monuments, and policies. For a servant, to hear whispers that the pharaoh had dreamed was to feel ripples of fate moving through the palace. What he saw in sleep could change your own tomorrow. Dreams also held personal weight. Imagine dreaming of your mother, gone for years, her face gentle, her voice soft. She blesses you, tells you she is well in the field of reeds. You wake with tears, but also with peace, convinced her spirit truly visited. Or imagine dreaming of fields heavy with grain, your family laughing under the sun. You take it as a promise that the next harvest will be good, even if your belly aches now. Dreams were anchors of hope, carrying you through uncertainty. Not every dream was shared. Some you kept secret, fearing their meaning, or cherishing them too much to speak aloud. A dream of forbidden love, of touching the hand of someone far above your station. A dream of walking freely from the palace, never to return. These were visions you tucked away, hidden treasures, or quiet rebellions that lived only in your heart. Modern minds might call it superstition, but for the Egyptians, dreams were as real as the waking world. They were part of the same fabric, woven with gods, ancestors, and unseen forces. To ignore a dream was to ignore a message. To interpret, it was to navigate life more wisely. Even servants, whose voices rarely mattered in daylight, felt empowered by dreams. In sleep, you were equal with nobles, for the gods spoke to all dot, and so, when you lie down after a long day of serving, your body aching but your spirit drifting, you trust that what comes in dreams has meaning. You whisper a prayer before closing your eyes. May my heart be light, may my dreams be true, may the gods walk with me. But what about the afterlife itself, the great promise that made both waking toil and nightly visions bearable? Field of reeds, the judgment before Osiris, the eternal life that Egypt built its pyramids to secure? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Or all the rituals, for all the toil of daily life, there was always one horizon that loomed, larger than any other, the afterlife. To the Egyptians, death was not the end, but a crossing. And everything they did, from the grand pyramids of pharaohs to the humblest amulet clutched by a servant, was shaped by the belief that another life awaited beyond the tomb. Tonight, let's step into that vision, imagining what it meant for a servant to live in a world where eternity was always part of the conversation. Picture yourself at the end of a long day in the palace, your hands sore from carrying jars, your body aching from endless errands. You lie down on your mat, staring into the darkness. For a moment, you wonder, when the breath leaves your body, one day, what will become of you? The pharaoh has his pyramid, his priests his treasures. But what about you, the servant, whose name may never be carved into stone? The Egyptians believed in a place called the Field of Reeds, an eternal mirror of life on earth. Imagine lush fields stretching endlessly, grain taller than a man, rivers flowing cool and clear, skies always soft with dawn. Families are reunited there, children laughing, grandparents smiling. There is no hunger, no toil, only the joy of living perfected. You imagine walking through that field, seeing your mother again, hearing her voice say your name. You imagine setting down your tools forever, your hands finally at rest. That hope softens the hardest day dot, but to reach this paradise, you must pass through judgment. The journey of the dead is long and perilous. First, your body is prepared, wrapped in linen, blessed with oils, protected with charms. You may not afford a grand tomb, but even a simple grave with prayers and amulets carries meaning. In the palace, you have seen the linen wrappings of nobles, the jars of organs carefully placed, the golden masks. You know the difference wealth makes, yet you also know the gods see more than riches. The heart is the key. The Egyptians believed that in the hall of judgment, your heart would be weighed on a great scale against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and balance. Imagine that moment, your heart, the very seat of your soul, placed delicately on one side, the feather on the other. If your heart is light, unburdened by lies and cruelty, the scales balance, and you are welcomed by Osiris into eternity. But if your heart is heavy, weighed down with sin, Hammett waits nearby. This creature, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, devours unworthy hearts, and the soul ceases to exist forever. No punishment, no paradise, only nothingness. For a servant, this belief is strangely comforting. You may not build pyramids. You may not afford golden amulets. But if you live with honesty, kindness, and loyalty, your heart can still be lighter than the feather. Eternity is not only for kings. It is for all whose hearts are true. Along the journey, the dead must face trials. Serpents, crocodiles, demons with flaming knives. The underworld is full of dangers. But you are armed with spells from the Book of the Dead, prayers written on papyrus and buried with you. Even if you cannot afford a scroll, you memorize fragments whispered by priests. Words of power to open gates, to silence monsters, to guide your steps. You imagine speaking these words as you walk through dark corridors, your voice steady, your heart calm. At last, you reach Osiris, the green-skinned god of resurrection, seated on his throne, flanked by Isis and Nephthys. Behind them stand the 42 judges, each representing a different sin. You must declare your innocence before each. I have not stolen. I have not killed unjustly. I have not lied. I have not polluted the water. I have not cursed the gods. This litany, the negative confession, is your defense. Imagine standing there, your voice trembling but firm, knowing that each truth spoken is another stone removed from the weight of your heart. If you pass, the field of reeds opens before you. You see familiar faces waiting, waving, calling your name. You walk into the sunlight, feeling warmth not of the desert but of eternal dawn. You know hunger no more, thirst no more, exhaustion no more. You are free, whole, and joyful forever. This is the vision that steadies you as you toil in life. Even in the palace, you see echoes of this belief everywhere. When you polish statues of Osiris, you think of your own hope for eternity. When you carry offerings of bread and beer, you know these same foods are placed in tombs, meant to feed the dead in their journey. When you watch scribes inscribe names on stone, you remember that to have one's name remembered is the truest immortality. You whisper your own name sometimes, quietly, hoping it lingers in the air long enough for the gods to catch it dot. And though the Pharaoh's tomb is magnificent, filled with treasures of gold, the heart of the afterlife is not wealth, but balance. You find comfort in this. Your life may be humble, your possessions few, but if you live justly, eternity is still yours. It is a fairness woven into the fabric of existence, proof that Mat extends even to the lowest servant. Sometimes you dream of walking with your ancestors through green fields, your feet brushing against endless reeds. You feel the cool water of canals, hear the buzz of insects in warm air, and laugh with joy. You wake with tears in your eyes, convinced you have touched the afterlife itself for a moment. It gives you strength to rise, to face another day in the palace, to carry jars and sweep floors with renewed patience. The Egyptians built pyramids and painted tombs not only to honor their dead, but to remind the living of what awaited. For a servant, every glimpse of a tomb wall, every whispered prayer, every amulet was a promise. Your toil is not forever. Beyond the dust and heat lies eternity. But how did servants themselves live within this constant tension between labor and eternity? What was it truly like, day after day, to serve in the palace, not just in duties, but in emotions, in relationships with others, in the invisible web of hierarchy and quiet rebellion? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Life as a servant in the Pharaoh's palace was a mixture of invisible loyalty, constant labor, and quiet endurance. You lived not for yourself alone, but for the rhythm of the palace, where each gesture and task kept the machinery of kingship humming. And yet, beneath the weight of duty, there was always a human heart, a servant's own private thoughts, friendships, frustrations, and small rebellions that never made it into inscriptions or scrolls. Tonight, let's step into that inner life, imagining what it truly felt like to walk the fine line between obedience and selfhood. The hierarchy was everywhere. Above you stood overseers, sharp-eyed and quick with punishment if a task faltered. Above them stood stewards and scribes, who managed supplies and recorded everything from bread rations to linen counts. And far above all stood nobles, priests, generals, and finally, the Pharaoh himself, a man you might glimpse only rarely, carried past in splendor or appearing like a god in festivals. You were expected to bow your head, to make yourself smaller, to serve silently. But silence does not mean emptiness. Within, you still thought, laughed, worried, and even resisted in subtle ways. That friendship among servants was survival. Imagine standing beside another as you grind grain, both of you moving the heavy stone back and forth. You whisper jokes under your breath, laugh at the absurdity of bread, so gritty it breaks teeth, and suddenly the task feels lighter. Or picture carrying water jars side by side, sweat running into your eyes, and one friend balances their jar carefully so you can adjust yours. These small gestures form bonds deeper than official records. No papyrus scroll will remember them, but you do, and they keep you steady. There were rivalries too. Not all servants were kind. Some jostled for favor, reporting others' mistakes to overseers in hopes of better rations or lighter duties. Whispers and suspicion floated through servant quarters as often as laughter. You learned to trust carefully, to guard your words, to know who might twist them into knives. Hierarchy bred caution, and even in friendships, you always left a sliver of distance, just in case. Still, even within constraint, there were moments of rebellion, not loud or dangerous, but quiet acts of selfhood. Imagine sneaking an extra bite of honey cake from a tray meant for a noble, savoring the sweetness quickly before returning to your duties. Or slipping away for a moment to stand in a shaded courtyard, closing your eyes, breathing deeply, pretending for a heartbeat that the palace is yours. Sometimes, rebellion is simply letting your mind drift while your hands continue to work. Imagining yourself far away, walking by the Nile without orders pulling at you. Love, too, found its way into the lives of servants. You might catch the eye of another servant across a courtyard, exchanging glances during long hours of labor. Words are scarce, but a smile lingers. A hand brushes against yours when passing a basket. In a life so tightly bound, even these small sparks feel like fire. Some relationships grow in secret, tucked into corners of the palace, whispered under starlight. Others bloom into marriages with humble ceremonies, bread shared, beer poured, amulets exchanged. Love makes even the palace feel human, reminding you that you are more than duty. Fear is always present. The fear of punishment for mistakes, a dropped jar, a burned dish, a misstep in front of a noble. Fear of illness, fear of injury that might end your ability to serve. Fear of being forgotten, of dying without offerings, of your name fading too soon. But alongside fear, there is resilience. You learn to bend under pressure without breaking, to laugh even when aching, to find meaning in service while still remembering yourself. Sometimes you look at the Pharaoh and feel awe. He is Horus, living God, embodiment of Egypt. But sometimes, in quieter thoughts, you wonder what he is like alone. Does he grow weary, as you do? Does he long for simple bread, not gilded feasts? Does he ever envy the freedom of common folk who walk the streets without guards or protocol? You will never know, but the thought lingers, humanizing even the man worshipped as divine. The palace is not only grandeur, it is also noise and sweat, scolding and gossip, smells both pleasant and foul. The kitchens reek of smoke and roasting meat. The laundry areas smell of river water and soapwort. Corridors echo with footsteps, orders, laughter, and cries. Life here is intense, never still. You, the servant, are its pulse, unseen but essential. Without you, the lamps go out. The floors gather dust. The Pharaoh hungers. And the illusion of perfection collapses. At night, when you lie on your mat, staring up at stars through an open roof, you reflect. You think of your family, of the city outside, of the Nile flowing endlessly through fields. You think of your own mortality, of the afterlife you hope to reach, of the gods who watch silently as you labor. You think of the stories told by your grandmother, the laughter of your children, the jokes of your friends. And you realize that while your name may never be carved into stone, your life is still part of Egypt, as vital as the Pharaoh's. Even if unseen, this is the paradox of servitude. Invisibility on the outside, but a whole universe alive within. Your duties may bind you, but your imagination makes you free. In daydreams, you are more than a servant. You are a fisherman sailing the Nile, a farmer harvesting rich grain, a traveler crossing deserts, a dreamer walking into eternity. No overseer can touch those visions, and perhaps that is what keeps you steady. The knowledge that while you polish bronze until it gleams, or sweep floors until your back aches, or carry jars until your shoulders burn, you still belong to yourself. You are part of a living, breathing tapestry of humanity. The palace may not remember your name, but the gods will. And perhaps one day the field of reeds will open, and you will walk there not as a servant, but as yourself, whole, free, and eternal. But what does all of this mean to us now, thousands of years later? Why does the life of a forgotten servant matter? And what can their quiet endurance teach us about our own restless world today? That's what we'll explore in the final part. We have walked together through the palace halls and dusty streets, through kitchens smoky with roasting meat, through festivals alive with drums and laughter, and even into the chambers of the dead where hearts are weighed against feathers. We've carried jars, swept floors, whispered gossip, dreamed dreams, and gazed at stars above mud brick roofs. And now, as our journey comes to rest, it is time to step back and reflect, not just on the life of a servant in ancient Egypt, but on what their story might mean for us today in our own restless and busy world. Imagine, one last time, the servant rising before dawn. Their mat is rough, their body tired, yet they rise anyway, because life does not pause. They wash their face with cold water, tie their linen kilt, and step into the rhythm of a palace that will demand their labor from sunrise to sunset. Their tasks are endless, their name forgotten by history. And yet, their existence is woven into the very fabric of an empire. Without their steady hands, the lamps would go out, the pharaoh would go hungry, the rituals would falter. They are invisible, but they are essential. There is a kind of peace in this rhythm. The scraping of grain, the carrying of water, the sweeping of dust. These are not glamorous tasks, but they have meaning simply because they are done. For us, living in a world of constant noise and urgency, perhaps there is something to learn here. Not every moment must be extraordinary. Not every act must be remembered. Sometimes the quiet repetition of duty, the small rituals of daily life, are what keep everything in balance. Think of how a servant's laughter breaks out, even in the midst of hardship. They joke about gritty bread, about clumsy overseers, about sandals too delicate for real work. Humor is their relief, their breath of freedom. And isn't that what we do even now? We find memes, inside jokes, little sparks of joy to carry us through heavy days. Thousands of years have passed, yet the impulse is the same. To survive, we must laugh. Consider also the way servants carried faith into every corner of their work. To them, sweeping a floor was not only cleaning, but making space for Mat, the divine order. Offering bread was not only feeding the pharaoh, but nourishing the gods themselves. Their lives were small, yet their vision was vast, every task tied to eternity. We may not believe as they did, but perhaps the lesson lingers. Meaning is not always found in grandeur. Sometimes it is found in the intention we bring to even the smallest action dot. And then there is family. The servant's body may have belonged to the palace, but their heart belonged to their home. Children's laughter, meals shared on rooftops, prayers whispered at shrines to ancestors. These were the true treasures of life. No pyramid, no golden mask, no lavish tomb could replace them. Isn't it the same for us? When we look back on our own lives, it is not the grand moments alone that shine, but the quiet ones. Meals with loved ones, laughter in kitchens, holding hands in silence. The Egyptians lived with a constant awareness of death. And yet that awareness did not crush them. It guided them. They believed that life was a preparation, that deeds mattered, that hearts would one day be weighed. For them, eternity was always close. Perhaps that belief gave them resilience, a reason to endure. And for us, whether we imagine an afterlife or not, perhaps the thought remains useful. Our actions ripple, our choices weigh. Our kindness echoes longer than we know. When we think of Egypt today, we think of pyramids, temples, golden masks. But the true Egypt was built by countless hands, most of them nameless. It was built by servants carrying jars, farmers guiding oxen, craftsmen shaping wood, mothers baking bread, children gathering reeds. The monuments stand because of them. The gods were worshipped because of them. The pharaoh shone because of them. Invisible threads holding together a civilization got. And isn't that the story of humanity itself? The world remembers kings and generals, but it is sustained by ordinary people, by hands that labor quietly, by hearts that endure silently, by lives that leave no inscription but matter all the same. To reflect on a servant's life is to remember that greatness rests not on gold, but on human persistence. Now, as we close this journey, imagine yourself stepping out of the palace one last time. The sky above is heavy with stars, the desert air cool against your skin. You hear the distant rush of the Nile, eternal and calm, carrying whispers of reeds and frogs and fishermen's songs. You breathe in deeply. The palace looms behind you, its lamps glowing like constellations on earth. Ahead lies the city, sleeping on rooftops, families huddled under the night sky. Beyond it lies the endless horizon, where the desert meets eternity. You think of the servant, lying now on their mat, already half-dreaming. They are tired, yes, but they are also part of something immense. Their day has been full of repetition, of invisible labor, of duties few will ever know. But their story, like ours, is not only about work. It is about laughter, about family, about resilience, about hope. It is about being human in the midst of demands larger than oneself. And so, as you drift tonight, let this thought rest gently with you. Life does not need to be monumental to be meaningful. The servant's day, simple and humble, was as much a thread in eternity as the Pharaoh's reign. And in your own life, your small acts, your quiet rituals, your moments of kindness are just as vital as any monument dot as you breathe slowly now. Feel your shoulders soften, your mind settle. Let the rhythm of ancient footsteps, the sound of grinding grain, the splash of water in clay jars become a lullaby. The world slows, the palace grows still, and you are safe to rest dot as you drift off tonight. Remember, beauty changes, but the need to be seen never does. If this brought you calm, subscribe so we can share another journey together. And maybe share this with someone who thinks they'd survive a day in ancient times. They might be surprised. Now close your eyes, let your breath deepen, and step gently into your own dreamscape. The story is finished, but the night continues. Sleep well,